Hi guys, this is 12.1 Sports Injuries by Aaron Sparrowhawk. So first of all, I'd like to just sort of talk about an example that we'll be using throughout the PowerPoint. Obviously we're going to be giving examples later on in the PowerPoint, but this is just an injury example that we'll be using throughout describing the processes and things like that. So this is Kobe Bryant. He was playing a game. He was in the 80th game of a regular season. Kobe Bryant played 34 minutes straight before the injury. After trying to go round the player, Kobe Bryant tripped or got bumped, or either way he fell, and he actually tore his Achilles on the fall. And that was the injury. That is the injury that we'll sort of be using throughout this. So, when an injury occurs, receptors detect the pain. The pain doesn't happen until the receptors actually send the information to the hypothalamus in the brain. The moment Kobe Bryant would have torn the Achilles, he would have felt extreme pain. After this inflammation occurs, this is because the body sends excess fluid in order to bulge around the injury. During the Achilles tear, swelling would have been large, simply because it was there, the inflammation is there to protect the injury. Increased blood flow occurs in order to simply increase the healing process. While blood flow will have already been high because he was exercising, it will have still increased. And this is due to the final restriction is reduction of movement, and this is due to the body knowing that movement could cause worse damage. So Kobe's ankle would have been highly restricted to little or no movement. Tissue repair. So the clotting process starts with the brain sending more RBC to the wound. However, as this happens, a chemical reaction takes place. When a wound occurs, this reaction causes the platelets to become sticky and enables a temporary plug in effect for around the wound and across the wound. However, this isn't how a scab or long-term plug is formed. Other clotting factors to reinforce the plug are there, and other clotting factors are part of it, but it's the fibrin that enables the clot to stay together. The fibrin was almost like a glue. It sets and holds everything together. Blood cells do support this as well. So, for example, we can't use Kobe because he didn't actually have a cut or a slice through his leg. It was an internal thing. Let's take a boxer, for example, like above. The cut around his face, platelets will become sticky due to the chemical reaction, so that will cause a temporary plug eventually. After a while, the blood will eventually clot, and fibrin will take place and hold the clot together like a glue, and eventually after time, that will then cause a scab. So next, two types of bruising in effect, intramuscular and intermuscular hematoma. So when bruising occurs, it initially happens in the muscle belly. This is almost inevitable getting hit or making impact with something and your muscles. It's inevitable for bruising to come out. However, there are two types of bruising. Both are natural processes, however, one is wider spread and gives clear indication of impact, whereas other bruises can be quite subtle. So first is intramuscular hematoma. This is simply where you get hit, where your muscles get hit, and the blood and fluids stay within the muscle belly and don't actually spread anywhere. So obviously on this ankle, it's specific, it's in the muscle belly, it hasn't actually spread anywhere. So, for example, when Kobe Bryant tore his Achilles, when he hit the floor, it was probably hard enough to cause a bruise, but not so hard that it would spread and seep out the muscle belly, not that we know of anyway. So it probably would have stayed within the muscle belly. However, in some sports, it's likely that when bruising occurs, the fluids will seep out the muscle belly and into other external muscle groups. For example, snowboarders sometimes fall and hit the snow from heights or at speed, and this causes severe bruising, and at times intermuscular hematoma occurs, so that is when it seeps out the muscle belly and spreads across. Example here is just a picture of the guy's hand. It isn't just on one place, it's spread across the whole entire hand, meaning it is intermuscular. So, ankle injuries. When you're talking about degrees of ligament and muscle damage to the ankle, you must consider 3 degrees of severity. Is it mild, moderate, or severe? Firstly, a mild sprain means the ligament might have a very small tear, and it will cause some pain, and some pain will be present, but the stability is still strong and is still good. So that's the main thing, is that even though it is a slight tear and it might be very painful, it is still there and it is still strong enough to hold. So, moderate. Moderate is the second degree. It's hard to judge. It has a very wide spread of pain and things like that, so it can be almost on the borderline of severe, but almost, or it could be, so from almost borderline severe to only just moderate. It's that widespread. It's a very widespread thing that it's very hard to judge. Pain will be significantly stronger in moderate than mild. The difference is really the tear is slightly larger and the stability is a lot weaker and it isn't as strong, so the stability will be weak. Now the last degree is severe sprain, which means the ligament will be torn completely and ruptured. This causes large amounts of swelling, pain, and can cause the person to go into shock. Because of the severity, the joint is actually unstable and might be affected, and other tissues might be affected around the area as well, but the joint will be specifically unstable. Speaking from experience, this isn't fun and I'd really avoid doing it if I were you, so just try and avoid that. So, psychological responses to injury. First of all, we've got on the left the circle of when it actually happens. So fear, you are fearing, what's going to happen, is it actually torn, what's doing this, what's doing that. So that's the first thing that actually happens. Obviously you'll feel pain, but this is the psychological responses rather than the physiological. So obviously psychologically fear, you're in fear of your health, fear of your safety. And then anger, you might get angry because you're going to miss something, that this is important and this is bad, and it can just lead to a certain spike in aggression. Frustration, obviously it's frustrating to have people carry you around, to walk you around, to call this, to call that, to go to hospital, to have these scans. It's very frustrating. Stress, and they both kind of link in that way, that it's very stressful on your body and on psychological. Anxiety, you might actually be worried of how this is going to affect your season, how this is going to affect your performance after you've recovered fully. You might start to get those long-term thoughts that do cause you to get anxious. Depression, obviously when you're about a month in through your injury and you've had enough and you don't want to do it anymore. But obviously because this is straight away, depression can happen. And as soon as you make you get the instant results back or things like that. This is all of these things, and obviously denial. You might literally have just fallen on and immediately, no, this isn't happening, this isn't that. So those are sort of the first real sort of feelings you get when you're injured. Obviously the triangle here, that's more to do with during the rehabilitation process. So first of all, frustration, you can't do what you used to be able to do or anything like that or as effective. So the first couple of weeks and months you're extremely frustrated. It then can lead to depression at times, simply because again you sort of at this point you've done a month, 2 months of rehab or whatever it be, and you might really want to be itching to go back out, but you can't. Obviously that's causing depression. Need for motivation. A lot of people, the phrase is thrive or dive. People immediately are motivated, they don't need any help, they're ready, they set goals themselves, they're on it, they go. But dive, so obviously that's thrive, but dive can mean that they need motivation, they need help, they're lacking it, they don't want to be doing any rehab and they feel it's pointless. And finally, anxiety. When you're sort of coming towards the end, you might actually feel anxious about what's going to happen when you're fully healed. Are you going to be the same player? Are you going to be the same person? So all these are factors that could actually happen during an injury and when it's just happened, and during the rehabilitation process. So, next, we're now looking at sort of an example of soft tissue and hard tissue injuries, and examples of the rehabilitation process. So, first of all, soft tissue rehab example. So when talking about soft tissue injuries, rehabilitation can be an extremely long process. Example of this is Derrick Rose. When Derrick Rose was playing in a regular season game, he suffered a meniscus tear during the game. As he landed and he turned his body, causing the meniscus to sprain as well, and causing his MCL to sprain. So 2 days later, Rose had a meniscectomy, which is actually a really weird thing to pronounce. But it's the surgical removal of part or the torn meniscus. A meniscus tear is a common knee joint injury which happens with a lot of actual athletes. Rose's tear was a grade 3 tear. The meniscus was completely torn, so for the first month, Rose couldn't do any exercise and couldn't do anything. He was on crutches. He then went through the process of gradually putting more force through the knee. Rose also had to do extremely light leg presses to get a head start in strengthening surrounding muscles. He was then actually told by his physiotherapist that the cycling machine in the rehabilitation lab, where he was working at and where he was doing a lot of his stuff, would be his best friend, quote unquote. He was actually on that machine apparently 2 hours per day for the next 2 months, simply getting those legs stronger and putting more force through the knee. The last 3 months of his 5 months that he was out injured, he was then doing directional force. So that's when you're landing, you're jumping, and you're putting force through here, and then no force, and then no force, and then you jump and you land and you put extreme force through it. Simply because you need to know that you can do these things properly, and you know that your knee can go through anything before you go back to a very physical sport. And as soon as his knee was could withstand that, he was able and cleared for play. Something a lot more nastier here. Obviously, there's the injury there. It's a hard tissue injury. Hard tissue injuries are a lot more difficult to plan a rehab process for. On August the 1st, 2014, Paul George was participating in an American exhibition game when his leg hit the basketball stanchion at a perfect angle for his leg to break in 3 places and at the bottom of the leg to shatter. Paul George had 2 surgeries, one to realign all the bones and another to add ligaments and wire to ensure the bones stayed in that position. In the first 2 months, Paul wasn't actually allowed to do anything and was actually in crutches. With this injury, doctors were not sort of concerned with the bones will heal. They knew they were going to heal and hold. They were more uncertain and had more concern of the degree of movement and flexibility the muscles were going to have after this. Paul George started with light movements at the knee and ankle whilst doing calf raises and weight management. By his 3rd month, he was beginning to walk again. However, every 4 hours, Paul George had to lay on his back and raise his legs and do cycle motions, a lot like Derrick Rose, and he had to do that on and off for 20 minutes. After doing quadricep exercises such as squats, alien squats, and stationary cycling, he was able to strengthen weakened areas such as his quads, his calves, everything like that. Everything that hadn't been used for 5-6 months, which was almost like jelly, had to be re-strengthened. And apparently, according to his physiotherapist, he had 8 specific exercises to increase range of movement of the joints. After doing those 3 times a day each, he was cleared for light contact sport in his first 9 months, which was actually a lot better than people were thinking. And after working with his new team and shooting and jumping and sprinting on the leg, he was actually cleared for full contact sport in 9 months. However, the team weren't actually doing very well at the time, and it was because it was actually coming towards the end of the season. They weren't making the playoffs. So rather than giving him loads of minutes while they could, they actually rested him, and they only played him 4 minutes per game for the last 5 games. However, then the off-season came around, and by the pre-season of the next year, he was actually averaging 34 minutes per game, and he's actually now proven in the NBA that he has fully came back. He's averaging almost 28 points per game. So that's a full rehab process of soft tissue injury with Derrick Rose with an MCL sprain and a meniscus tear, and Paul George with the shattering of the right leg.